Hi, it's me Dave. So in this video what I thought I would share with you is how to do some portrait tips outside in natural light. So what I did is I got a couple of people from the photography group and we went downtown and we just went through a series of steps on how to do portraits, and I'm going to take you through those steps. I'm going to show you a few different tips and maybe you'll find them useful. I think you will. So let's get started. The first thing we started out doing was we did some photos just out in the open sun, because when you're out in the open sun it's not the best place to take photos, but a lot of people do it. Sometimes you're stuck in the sun and you don't really have an option. We went downtown because there's lots of good options. You never have to be out in the sun, but we took photos out in the sun just so you can see the difference. When you're out in the sun, the shadows are hard and it's going to cause people to squint. Their faces will be in the shadows and it just doesn't make for great photos. That's okay. You can move on to another step, and what that is to get the sun behind the subject so that there's no hard shadows on the face, and then you expose for the shadows. So if you're using the sunny day rule, for example, and you're at f16 at ISO 100/1/100th of a second, then you would just dial your aperture down to like f7.1 and you'd be exposing for the shadows. Anyways, you can figure out your exposure. Here's an example of what it looks like once we got the sun behind this subject. One of the problems with getting the sun behind the subject though is then you might have the background blowing out. What you can do is try and select a darker background. So if you're facing towards the shady side of the street, you have a darker background, it's not a problem. But you can also add a reflector in, and what that's going to do, that's going to level out the tones across the whole image. So your background won't be blown out if you're using a reflector, because you're reflecting the sunlight back into the person's face, but because you're using a reflector, the light reflected back is soft and looks nice. It's not like the kind of light quality that you get if you're in the direct sun. Next, what we did is we moved to the shady side of the street. If you're in the shade, then that's where the best light is, truly. And this is why I picked downtown, because there's lots of tall buildings and lots of places where there's shade, and actually you can get some fantastic light. The first thing we do when we take photos is we've got to look at the light. If you just take a photo in a shade without examining the light, you're not going to get necessarily great photos, because you want to make sure that the eyes are well lit. So a little exercise I have people do is I will have them take the model and say to them, follow my finger with your nose, meaning turn your body around and follow me as I walk around you in a circle. And the reason you do this is because you're going to be, as a photographer, observing the light in the subject's face, and what you want to see is nice catch lights in the eyes. The eyes really got to be well lit. So that's another tip. But just being in the open shade isn't necessarily the best place to be. Ideally, you want to find a place where there is a strong direction of light from the side. Problem with being in the open shade is often the main source of light is from above. And what that does is that causes this raccoon eye effect, which means the eyebrows will drop shadows down into the eyes because the light's from above. You don't want that, right? You want the eyes to be well lit. So there's a couple of things you can do. As I mentioned, we did the walk around. Even though you may be in the shade and the light is from above, it could be light reflected off the cement or other places that can help light the face. That's why you walk around the subject. But maybe you still can't find a great direction of light. For example, let's say it's an overcast day, then you're gonna need to maybe work a little bit harder to find a nice light. So one thing you can do, go and find a place where the light is blocked above, so the light only comes from one direction. An example may be inside of a doorway where you're going to have a really strong direction of light from one side. Look for places where there's something overhead that blocks the light, and have the subject stand underneath that and then turn to face the strongest direction of light. You're going to get fantastic modeling light in the subject's eyes. Here's a couple of photos where I've done this technique and it works out really well. Something else you can do with your subject, if you're in the shade and it's open shade and there's nothing above, you can have them kind of sit down and you can get above them. So you're looking down at the subject, you're taking a photograph right into their eyes. Because they're looking up towards you, then the sky is lighting their eyes. You get rid of that raccoon darkness under the eyes by having the subject sit and look up. Here's an example of that, and you can see how really well it works and just how beautiful the eyes are lit up. Another place you can find really nice light is to look for places where there's a strong delineation between light and shadow. There's a building blocking the light, so there's a hard shadow and there's a line past that where it's all just bright sun. So you take the subject, you have them stand very close to that crossover point, not in the sun, just a step back, right, but in the shade, and they're facing towards the light side, and then you're going to have just fantastic light because they're facing into the light but not the direct sun. You're going to get beautiful lighting across the board. Here's an example. As you can see, the subject is well lit, the lighting is beautiful, and it's just spots like these that you should look for and find the light. So always be looking for the light. So there's a couple more things to be aware of in portrait photography. One of them is the camera height. It's generally good to be at eye level. As you move your camera up and down the body, you're going to get different effects and different looks. So something you should try and see how it looks for yourself. For example, if you're shooting at chest level, you might affect a little bit how the proportions look. If you shoot at waist level, it's going to look different. And these are all good things to try because it can give you a unique perspective on how the images turn out. So experiment with shooting at different heights, but just remember that shooting at eye level is the general rule for portrait photography. That said, you can break rules, right? The next thing, focal length. There is an ideal kind of range for focal length. If you shoot with a really wide angle lens up close, then you're going to get some distortion. The nose is going to look big, the head will look small, that type of thing. And as you increase your focal length to like 50 millimeters, for example, that's more like the focal length of field of view of a human eye. But even with a 50 millimeter lens, if you're up close, you're going to have some distortion, which I don't know if you would see the same distortion through the human eye, but with a 50 millimeter lens up close, there's still going to be a little bit of distortion. So the best range, generally speaking, for portraits is 85 millimeters and up. I generally shoot between 85 and 160 millimeters. I find around 160 is really nice. Wide focal lengths like 17 to 35 millimeter are really quite useful for more like environmental portraits where you want to include something around the subject in the image. So I would tend to use 17 and 35 millimeters when I'm trying to include the background scene and work it in as part of a composition. The next thing then is framing. You want to make sure the arms are inside the image, not cut off. So try to frame your image that way. When you're taking the photo, it's better to have a little more than a little less because you can always crop and edit in. But if you've limited yourself in crop space, then you can run into problems. Because when you're out taking photos, you may not hold the camera level and things like that, and you get to edit in and then you rotate the picture to level it. Oh, you've already run out of some space, and then you want to crop in a little bit or have the subject off to one side or the other, and you just can't do it because you don't have enough space. So when you take the photos, allow a bit of buffer around the subject so that you can crop in and rotate and level images. It's going to work out better for you in the long run. That's my tip to you. Finally, let's talk about posing. So posing is a big thing. Unless you really know a lot about posing, then you might run into some problems because when you're out there taking photos of a subject, you've already got a lot of things to remember. So big tip for you is get the posing app. It's a cheap application that you can put on your smartphone, and it's got a lot of different poses that you can reference. And the thing is, you don't need to exactly copy the pose. It just gives you the idea and gets you started. And then once you've got somebody in a pose, you can look at the little details like the hand positions and have them relax their hands or do this or that or make tiny adjustments so you get the picture looking the way you want it to look. Okay, so that's a wrap for today. We covered a lot of tips in this video. I hope you find it helpful and you can apply these tips to your portrait photography and get some great shots. So thanks for watching. Get out there and take some portraits. Cheers.